Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 4 of our ukulele build. Well, I know that we're all anxious to get right in there and start bending the side strips for the ukulele. But there's something that we need to do that, and that would be our pipe bender. Now, the sides of the ukulele are soaked in water and they're bent over a hot pipe which is heated with a blowtorch. You can get electric ones, they're commercially available, but they're big bucks. And I mean, if you're only going to be making one ukulele or even two, bending it over a hot pipe powered by a blowtorch is the cheaper and more frugal alternative to the commercially available electric irons. So we're going to start off with a piece of 1.5 inch conduit, and it's going to be 24 inches long. Well, we've used a piece of blue painter's tape at our 24-inch mark, and this doesn't have to be as square as what our sanding drum is, but just for aesthetics sort of thing, we're going to try to get it as square as possible. So go ahead and get your hacksaw and chop this thing off at 24 inches. The next piece of material that we're going to need is a piece of 1-inch conduit, and we're going to cut that to a length of 4 inches. And again, a little bit of blue painter's tape goes a long way to help you cutting a square edge. Now that you have both pieces of pipe cut, take a half-round file and clean up the inside and the outside of each of these pipes, just to make sure there are no sharp burrs that are sticking out. Both pipes are filed inside and out, no burrs, no sharp edges. Now you want to take your 1.5 inch pipe and give a nice thorough sanding with about 220 grit all on the outside of the pipe. The reason for this, any dings or any kind of damage on the pipe, any tiny little burrs, that will transfer onto your wood. The steel is much harder than the wood itself, and you don't want to be leaving marks in the body of your instrument. So give a nice sanding all the way around the outside of the 1.5 inch conduit. The next thing we need to do in order to work on our hot pipe is this little piece of 1-inch conduit is actually the holder for the nozzle of the torch, and we need to get this pretty much centered on one end of the 1.5 inch conduit, kind of like this. I don't know if you can see that, but we're going to have it centered inside there just like that to hold the nozzle. Now ideally I'd like to see a rod down here to hold this and weld it on there, but I don't have access to a welder. So I think what I'm going to end up doing here is bolting this in, and for that I'm going to drill and tap some 1/4 threads into two sides of this nozzle holder, and then I'm going to screw it or bolt it into the end here just like that. And with those 1/4 threads put into the end of the 1-inch conduit, I'm going to drill some holes large enough for the 1/4 bolts to go into the 1.5" pipe, so probably a 5/16 hole to give me a little bit of play. And I'm going to go ahead and bolt this into the end of that 1.5" pipe. Now I may need to use some spacers in between the two bolts just to keep it from pulling up or down out of center. So probably some quarter washers will do the trick. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt this in place. And at this point in time, you should have something that looks a little like this with your two bolts holding it. It's great for holding it side to side, but unfortunately I realized top to bottom doesn't do so good. So I'm going to be adding one more 1/4 bolt in the top just to keep it from dropping when the torch goes into it. Well, what I ended up doing was drilling and tapping the 1.5" pipe, top and bottom, kind of as set screws to assist these other two that were tapped into the 1" pipe. And as you can see, that is rock solid. I mean, that's not going anywhere. So now that we have our torch mount made, we need to have something out the bottom here to be able to hold it in the vise. And ideally, a piece of flat steel welded to the pipe would be the best way to go, but I don't have a welder, as I said before. So I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up putting some bolts in the bottom of this pipe just so that they extend out the bottom. I'm thinking probably a 3/8 bolt to make it a little more sturdy, and with the two bolts out through the bottom I can securely clamp those bolts in the vise and keep this pipe from moving around. Well, you can see we've already got the one bolt mounted in here, and we want to get the second one put in. But how long are your fingers to get a nut into a hole way back here, if not way back here? The spacing on these are 3.5 inches apart, but using one of these extendable magnet pointer kind of things, all I do is stick the nut on the end of that pointer and you can bring it inside. The magnet will sort of hold that nut right at the pipe, because of course the pipe is magnetic, and once you get everything aligned you can just gently start the threads. You'll know once you get it, as soon as you get the threads started, pull the magnet out and there you go. So go ahead and tighten in your bolts. You want these to be super sturdy because this is going to be the basis that holds everything together. So bolt these two in, put your torch pipe back in, and we'll carry on from there. And that is all she wrote for the hot pipe. Pretty simple system. The nozzle of the torch is held in place at this 1" end down here, and all I've done is taken some thin wire, like a tie wire, and just wrapped it around the nozzle just to be sure that while I'm working with this, this doesn't come popping out and drop. So this is nice and secure in there. This pipe is securely in the vise. I mean, that's not going anywhere because you are going to be putting some downward pressure on this end over here to bend your pieces around this iron. So now that we've got this ready to go, the next thing that we need to do is we need to make a bending pattern. Well, I say that we need to make a bending pattern, and what I mean by that is when we're bending the sides of the ukulele, we don't have any reference on the wood to tell us where to bend, where to start the bend, where to finish the bend, sort of thing. So we need to have a pattern for reference. And for that, what we're going to do is we're going to take our body forming jig or mold that we made yesterday, and on a piece of hardboard we're just going to trace this out so that we have a copy of our profile on this board. And there it is. At this point in time now we want to take this board and we kind of want to decide where each bend stops, starts, finishes, the midpoint. So right here we have a bend. This here is where the bend would be the middle of the bend. And that bend seems to end over here. But then we have the middle of this bend. So we're going to mark the middle of that one. And then we have the middle of this bend. Now the starting point of this large sweeping curve, I would think, would be right here. So there's no need to place a mark at that point. However, it would end roughly here. So I'm going to put a little mark there, but that would also be the beginning point of where this one starts. And I would say that this one ends right there. But that would also be the beginning point of this curve, and this would be the ending point. So you're going to end up with a little drawing that sort of looks like this. And it's pretty much experimental. You got to try it and see how it works out. But once you get this done, you want to cover this with clear packing tape, because this will be your guide as you're bending the wood, and the wood is going to be wet, so you don't want to get this all soaking wet and have all your marks rub off. Well, our bending pattern is coated in packing tape, and I hope it's not causing too much of a glare for the camera. But what I'm going to do now is take a piece of string and I'm going to mark one end. And this one end is going to represent the bottom of our ukulele. And what you want to do is line up your string, and as you follow the pattern with the string, you want to mark your bending points onto the string. So we're just going to go around following our pattern very carefully and mark with a permanent marker where each of our bending points are. And once we get all of these marked, this will be our means to transfer our bend points onto our stock. So by straightening out our string and laying it on our stock, we now have specific points all the way along to tell us where our bend starts, stops, and by referencing them to the pattern, we'll know which way to bend and where they start, stop, and where their midpoints are. Well, now that we have our pattern here onto our string, we want to lay it onto one of our body sides and transfer our marks. So this will be the center point of the top of the ukulele, and this is a bend point, and I shifted it there just a little bit. This is a bend, another one, another one, another one, and this is the end of our ukulele. Then we want to take a square and square those lines off all the way along the board. These are only reference. This is not the beginning and end of all, but make sure that your lines are clear and easy to see. Well, you've gone through all this preparation and you now have your blank. Just to point it out, you may want to put your lines on both sides of this board. The reason for that is, depending on how you're bending over the form, your line may be down, and then you don't really know how far to go or how far to stop, or so both sides of the board will go a long way to helping you get this bend done. At this point in time now, what we have to do is soak these. So get yourself a container and water and lay these pieces in there soaking. You want to soak them for about 10 to 15 minutes in the water. So I'm going to go ahead and dunk this in the water, and then we'll come back for the bending. You're also going to need an old cloth, whether it be an old washcloth or what have you, because that's going to be draped over the pipe as it gets hot, and that will help the steam sink into the wood and loosen up the fibers of whatever wood you chose. So get yourself the water, soak your wood, get yourself an old cloth. A spray bottle full of water will also be helpful, and I'll come back and see you once the wood is soaked. Well, here we have a cookie sheet full of water, and we're just going to place our pieces of mahogany down into the water bath, and I'm just going to weigh them down with a couple of knives just to hopefully keep them from floating. And now that they're in there and soaking away, we're going to let them sit for about 10 minutes. I'm only doing 2 strips. I'm not expecting these to survive, but that's okay. It's a learning curve. You're also going to need a spray bottle, and it wouldn't hurt to have a thermometer. And once this is all soaked, we're going to heat our pipe up to just under 400 degrees. Well, over here on the one end, you can see our torch is all set up, ready to go. And once our wood is completely soaked for the 15 minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to fire up that torch, and we're going to get the pipe between 350 and 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's like 177 to 204 Celsius if you don't want to do the conversion. And we're just going to use a candy thermometer, just touching it on the pipe to see where that temperature is at. And once we got it at that temperature, we're going to try to bend some of these pieces. Before we get into the bending, I just want to point out I'm no expert here. This is actually a first for me. So anything that I relay here is either from personal experience as I learn along with this project, or from things that I've researched. So from what I understand, the important part here is to keep constant pressure on that board while letting the steam from the hot pipe evaporating that water to penetrate and loosen the fibers of the wood, and eventually the wood will give and allow you to bend it. Sounds great in theory. You want to make sure or try your best not to have your piece of wood skewed on the pipe, because if you're not bending square, you're actually introducing a twist to the body of your instrument. So try to keep it as square as you can. Other than that, things like wearing gloves is pretty important here. Should you accidentally touch the pipe with your fingers, a good pair of leather gloves or otherwise will help you out with that. Bottom line, this is a dangerous process. You've got an open flame in a pipe, you've got very hot metal. It's not a natural thing that we're doing here. So please guys, be careful when you're doing this, have fun with it, and let's go ahead and see how we make out with it. I'm not making any promises here, but I'm hoping for some positive results. Well, we'll go ahead and get the torch going and get some heat happening in here. At this point in time now, we just need to wait for the pipe to heat up, and we'll be using this candy thermometer here to test. We want to be in between 350 and 400, and I have a little red marker there to show me when I'm up to temperature. There's a lot of heat coming out of the end of this pipe, so don't stand in front of it. You want to be careful about that. Well, you can see there that we're up to temperature, and it's dropping fast because I took it away. But let's go ahead and see how we do on bending some of these boards. You can see here I'm just working it back and forth over the iron, don't want to go too crazy on it and dry out the wood too quickly. But it is giving. It is starting to bend ever so slightly. And that's good. I mean, if we're having problems with bending, we can put a damp rag on the pipe, and that will allow us to use even more steam in order to bend this wood. You can see there our wood is drying out just a little, and if it starts drying out, that's no problem. Just give it a little mist with your mister bottle that I had said that you are going to need, and get it back on the pipe. Like I said, you want to keep it square as you can. You can see that steam coming off of there. It's going quite well. I have to say I'm surprised. And every once in a while, and of course, you just want to check it with your form. Our bend isn't going exactly as it should. We have some areas there that need some attention. And you can see there, we just broke it. A little too much pressure has broken this piece. But I'm not concerned. I'm going to keep bending this one for practice. And then when I come back, we'll see how we do. Well, at this point now, we've introduced some surgical tubing to hold this in place on the mold. It's not perfect, but it is just the first practice one, and I fully expected that this one would be destroyed. Once we get it bent properly and forming completely to the mold, we want to add some clamps to clamp this in there squarely against the jig, and from there you want to let it dry. If you have any areas that are very wet, like what we have right here, take that tubing out of there and dry it on your hot pipe, because if you allow this to dry in the jig, it can start cupping. So you want to take as much of the moisture out as you can. So basically use this jig on the pipe to dry the piece. I also want to point out something here, which is this. This is scorching. That's something that you want to avoid. This obviously, like I said, is just my first practice piece, and I'm quite pleased with the way it worked out, but my next one now will be much better, I'm sure. The thing that you also may want to consider is, in that last segment you saw that I had a cloth over the pipe. That was a wet cloth, and that steam from the cloth coming up through really helped in the bending and cut down on the scorching. So this piece is an experiment that is successful as far as I'm concerned, and with this experiment done, now I'm going to move on and actually bend one of the good ones. I don't think you're going to need a video of that. I just showed you the process with this piece. It's the exact same process. So once I get those pieces bent up, I'll come back and see you. Okay, the surgical tubing wasn't really cutting it for clamping pressure. So if you guys didn't throw out the pieces that you cut out of this for your mold, I saved them, but it works great. Put them back in place, apply some quick grips or whatever clamps you have, and it really sandwiches it in there to make a nice clean pressure. And we're going to let that dry up and see how we make out with it. Well, we now have both sides of our ukulele successfully bent and drying in those forms that we made. How many did we break? We broke two. These two right here. This one broke just a little bit at the beginning when I was first playing with it, and there's just way too many scorch marks. Let me just show you that. Way too many scorch marks on this one. This was prior to putting the rag on the pipe to alleviate those scorch marks. So this particular one here, jump. This one here, it was going really well, and then my bend started to go a little wonky, and you can see the breakage. I just completed the break, but it was almost all the way through. And that was from the figure in the mahogany that was having a hard time with the bending process. So this one, junk. But we do have 2 usable forms, and I still have 2 pieces of stock left. So I will caution you, while I was bending, I inadvertently put my arm in front of this pipe, and that's the hot exhaust. And all I could smell after that was burning hair for about the next 10 minutes. So please be careful. One little slip can cause you a serious burn with this pipe running between 350 and 400 degrees. All in all, a great process, a lot of fun, great learning, and it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to bend each form. It does help to have a second set of hands manning the spray bottle to apply water to the rag and to the wood whenever it gets too dry. And I'd like to thank my wife for coming out to the shop for that. But other than that, absolutely awesome. Let those forms sit now overnight or longer until you're positive that that wood is completely dry, and they should hold their shape just fine. Well, at this point in time, we're pretty much at a standstill until this stuff dries up. So that'll pretty much be it for this week's show. All I can say is that from here now, once we remove those sides of the ukulele from their forms, if there is any amount of spring back, we can just spray those forms with the spray bottle and heat the iron back up. And while they're still in the forms, work them and soften the wood, and then let them dry again until they fit nicely in the forms. So next week we're going to start getting into the assembly of the body, and of course the trim pieces inside, the soundboard, the back. It goes on and on and on. But guys, that's going to be it for this week. There's not much more we can do. It's a waiting game now. There's a lot of work still to be done. We've covered a lot of ground. We've made a lot of progress. And guys, I want to thank you for tuning in again this week. But I'm going to see you next week with yet another woodworking video.